Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everybody, and we are going to start our lecture number 13, and that is about communication in complex projects. Communication is very important part of project management, and after going through these slides and this lecture, we can better understand how important this thing is. But before we actually start our today's lecture, you do know that we have a summary of the previous lecture. So the other day and the days before, we were actually discussing about cost management part of project management, and when it comes to complex projects, we have to actually use so many type of estimates and then budget types, and then we actually control cost, but that will be discussed in earned value management. But the other day we were talking about the elements of the contract baseline. How do we have a good one cost and schedule baseline, and how to control the cost through that baseline. And then we had discussed this case study, and we had assumed one of the project carried out by CIT, and that is of construction of a house. And remember, we had actually prepared a very good estimate, and we had divided our project into control accounts, and those control accounts were actually divided into work packages, and work packages were given as or divided as activities. And then we had actually estimated one of the work package, the cost, how to actually estimate the cost of one work element, and then we had actually concluded and what kind of resources we are in need of, and then we have decided how much effort we are in need of to carry out that particular activity. And after having that, we had market rates with us, so by multiplying the rates with the effort, we had got the cost of that very particular resource. And then we had added up different fringe benefits and overheads and stuff like that. And after going through the same process for every resource, and if we are having like 8 of the resources, then by summing them up and then applying fee on each of the resource cost, we were actually come up with this total cost of work package. And in similar fashion, we had completed our the costs of all the work packages, and then by summing up all the costs of those work packages, we had got the cost of control accounts, and those control accounts were actually summed up to give the cost of the project. And if we actually go and sum up the all the costs of the project, and we may have this cost of the program. We do know that this approach is a bottom-up approach, and we had discussed the disadvantage of this approach is that the management cost is being ignored in this method, because you are so objective, you actually miss a little bit of holistic overview, and hence management cost is not added or calculated through this type of estimation. And then we had negotiated our contract with this buyer, and we had concluded that whatever the cost we had actually presented, the budget of our customer is a bit low, so we had actually agreed on something like which was less than the estimated cost. And then we had readjusted all of the costs, and then we had decided which activity will be carried out at which part of the month, and hence we had actually the cost which is needed in 1 month, and then 2nd month, and 3rd and 4th and 5th month. And then we had discussed about budget reconciliation stuff, and in this way we had learned how to work with cost and schedule baselines, and then we had discussed a little bit for cost control, and we had concluded our lecture that cost control part will be discussed in good detail when it comes to earned value management session. So let's begin with our today's lecture, and that is very important part of project management. And when it comes to complex projects, so this is again a very big difference. So if you are having lesser communication, then the project is simple one, maybe very simple one if the other parameters remain same. But with lesser cost and lesser time or lesser time constraints, but the stakeholder number is huge, the project becomes complex. So this is another constraint or characteristic that complex projects usually to depict. So before we actually go and discuss the communication in the reference of complex projects, we will define what is the definition of communication, and we have to define it. So there are many definitions available, and one of the definition reads any act by which one person receives from another person information about the person's needs, desires, perceptions, knowledge, and affective states. So these are a few words which actually translates what do we know about communication. And the second definition is it is a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, and behaviors. So this is a very good definition, very brief, like behaviors are actually discussed there, and then signs and symbols, and there is a word which is used over there, the information, and in first definition the same word was used. Now there is a difference between the information and communication, right? So communication is the process by which actually information is transferred and translated and intended to deliver or being received. And another definition is the exchange of thoughts, messages, information as by speech, signal, or writing. And there is another very good thing that is that can be used for communication is body language. So human beings are blessed with this thing or cursed with this thing. They actually do communicate a lot, and most of the time, but this is very important, most of the time they think they are using words and they are so effective, but studies reveal that more than 70% of the communication is being done through other means, and that is body language. So 70% of the communication is done through body language and not through words. Now that is amazing. So this slide shows you this human being, and he is actually communicating something, and then animal, they do communicate, and yes, the plants, they do communicate as well. So the ability to communicate in some form or other is a power which living organisms have, whether they are humans, animals, insects, in some cases even plants. So communication is most routine thing we do throughout our lives. And now we will proceed towards the definition of communication management, and while our context of this discussion is the project management, so we will focus on project communication management. So the definition as defined by PMI in PM Book 5, the project communication management includes all the processes that are required to ensure timely and appropriate planning, collection, creation, distribution, storage, retrieval, management, control, monitoring, and the ultimate disposition of project information. So all the processes which are actually taking care of this, when they become a collection, then we call them good communication management processes. What is the relevance of communication for projects? So communication is an integral part, crucial element for every project. So while you start developing a project charter, then you are authorizing something, and you are authorizing the project manager and the project team to use company resources for the project. So this document is a communication document, And then there is a term used, widely used, and you people must be having a very good idea of, and that is project management plan. And we had talked of project management plan. So project management plan includes, but not limited to, the project integration management plan, project cost management plan, project time management plan, project quality management plan, project communication management plan, project procurement management plan, project HR management plan, and project quality management plan, project procurement management plan, risk management plan, project stakeholder management plan, and then project configuration management plan, resource management plan, and process improvement management plan. So you see, there are a lot of documents which actually take part to create this one document, project management plan. And that is what? See, that is kind of a communication document. You are actually communicating something with somebody. Like if you are preparing these project management plan, so it helps your team to understand what is going to happen and what they have to actually do to complete that project. And you actually submit that plan to project stakeholders and top management. So they must know if what you are actually doing over there. So that is a key element for any project. And communication can make up or break a project. Now this is very, very relevant. I mean, so I do have one project in my experience when I had witnessed such thing. This was actually, the project was initiated with very high political will or organizational commitment. And the project cost was 100 million, and that was consultancy project, and by that time it was the cost was huge, and it was kind of one of the largest consultancy project in the history of road sector. So the project team had been assembled, and they were very good professionals, and one of the very best project managers was hired for this particular project, and the project team members, they were technically so sound. What they have actually did, they were actually stationed in the very same office where the client was stationed. So the client had actually given the living space for the project team. And the concept was the project team will continue and work on the project, and the client or the employer will learn how to do the project and the processes. But later on, what really happened, the project manager moved out, and the new project manager came, and he was a technical guy, and he was not sure of the communication part of the project management, as he actually proved later on. And what happened then? They actually completed the project after 3 or 4 years, and when they had launched their invoices, the customer or employer replied, "What have you done, by the way?" And then they've represented, "Okay, we are going to give you this presentation, what were we up to and what deliverables we have created." And when they they presented this presentation, and they have presented their deliverables to the customer. The customer was shocked, and the customer or employer said, well, this is not what we wanted. We wanted something new and different, and that is, we wanted to collect data in that format, and then we wanted interfaces in that shape and stuff like that. And the project team was amazed if they have to redo the whole of the project. You know, I'm talking about some million over there, and some time over there, like 2 or 3 years. And there is a famous quotation, and that is a bit, you know, funny. They used to say that if you are planning your project for 6 months, then your project will be completed in 1 year. And if you are planning for your project to be completed in 1 year, your project will be completed in 2 years. And if you are planning your project for 2 years, your project is not going to be completed. So that is a funny part. That is not true for the large projects. But, you know, the thing is, for that particular project, the time constraint was there, the cost was huge, and the project team was standing nowhere. And what was the reason? They did not actually engage. They never actually collected the requirements from the customer. They never tried to engage the stakeholders, never tried to analyze them, and never tried to understand the importance of the communication. So by that time, I do not have any doubt that project is a failure, because they were even paid because the high commitment of the top management was with the project. When the top management was informed that project is completed, the project was handed over to the customer. But the customer, the technical people with the customer, they had never used that project. Now, remember, if this very company, an international company, if tries to bid in future with that project in their profile and with very high remarks, like we have done this 100 million project in Pakistan and in road sector, and one of the largest consultancy for design and stuff like that, will you believe this customer will give them adequate mark, or even will consider them to get them passed? I do not see anything like that. So, and this is how communication is very important. This is how stakeholder engagement and management is so very important. So communication can make or break the project. Okay, the communication process in project can be highly complex, and if the process is not managed properly, can obstruct the project from attaining its goal within time and budget allocated for it. For so many times, the project teams are doing their project in isolation, and when they turn up with the product and the client says, okay, this is not what we wanted, or a part of it we do not want in that shape, and then the project team is forced to, you know, have some more time spent and have some more cost spent on such things. So the fundamental communication challenge for the project manager and the project team is to design and implement an effective and efficient project-specific communication strategy and plan which satisfies the diverse and changing informational needs of all the project stakeholders throughout the project life cycle. Now there is a word, informational needs and changing informational needs. So the informational needs may be changed with the time. A stakeholder is very much interested in the output and outcome and the execution of the project in the start. But with the passage of time, a new project has surfaced and the stakeholder has shifted his or her interest in that project, and his or she is not able to actually give the proper attention to this very project. For that case, you have to readjust the informational needs criteria for that. But there is a stakeholder, the one who was having least interest in the project has identified, well, this project is of major concern for his or her community, and he or she has taken serious interest in recent times, and your communication document states that this stakeholder needs to be updated after 6 months. But now the situation has changed. She or he has actually learned new things about the project. So now you have to revise what should be conveyed and with what frequency you have to give him or her. So we were talking about the information and communication. So information and communication are the two sides of a single coin. They complement each other. So information is of little value unless it can be communicated to stakeholders who need it. And communication is pointless unless it carries some informational content. So if you are actually picking up the phone and this guy picks up the phone and you tries to explain the engineering problem to that guy, and this guy is not even your proper audience, and he or she is forced to listen. So there won't be, you know, a big transfer, communication, proper communication. And then if you are actually communicating with somebody and information is not important, and then you are actually trying to communicate, what is the big point? Okay, so how do usually we communicate? And that is speaking. So I am actually speaking, so I am communicating, and you are listening, so you are also communicating. And reading, so if I am actually reading and you are reading these slides, so you are actually communicating. And writing, we are about to write something, okay, so then we are communicating. And as I've told you, more than 70% of the communication in humans that is based on body language, and people are very, much, they can identify the body language change, and they do actually act according to the body language. And what is the purpose of communication? So we have to inform somebody that something has happened, and we have to notify the employees, okay, so this Saturday will be off, or this Monday will be off, and to instruct our subordinates to follow these rules and regulations to carry out the job, and to request our seniors to give our additional reserves, management reserves, and to clarify the stakeholder, or so I'm actually giving you example. So it is not only if we request only to our senior man, we can request the functional manager, stakeholders, and stuff like that. Okay, so to clarify, for example, situation to some stakeholder, and then to review and to evaluate. A big problem in communication, and especially in project communication, to get the message across from sender to the recipient, so that the purpose behind the communication is achieved. So this is a big challenge and problem. So this is the basic model over there. Somebody who is a speaker, and let's say she's a girl, and she intends something to convey. So she thinks over there in her head, and she creates a message, and then message is encoded in words. Okay, so like I'm actually speaking, so I am encoding some of the message which has been created in my mind, and I'm using words to convey this message to you, and then encode this word through tongue in sound, and this sound is transferred through some media, and the media can be a telephone or some other media, and then that message or that sound is actually decoded to words, and words decoded into meanings, and message received. So whatever you intending to communicate, and if that is different than what is being perceived, then you are in big trouble. And this do happen. I mean, Now this does happen if you want to say something and your body language is not actually helping you over there, then your message is very much not understood. Okay, so and then communication and success of project, we had talked about that thing, and several and extensive studies have been conducted by consultants and others over the years to determine the causes of project success. And there are so many factors which influence the success of the project. And you people must be having a list of project success factors with you. And one of the success factor for a project may be if the project has achieved its objective or not. And then if the project was completed within a budget and within time frame specified and meeting or exceeding customer needs and requirements, and the project has satisfied the set of standards, and there may be the stakeholders are very satisfied. And another dimension to success of project is the communication. The causes of project failure are complex and many, and usually attributed to a number of factors. Communication inadequacies are often mentioned explicitly as one of the causes of project failures. So poor communication is one of the reason for the failure, and at times very good communication and practices that ensure project success. And shortcomings in communication, what do you mean by shortcomings? So communication shortcomings can cause a number of problems during project life cycle. For example, misunderstood or undocumented requirements and specifications. Okay, then you had to construct a small bridge at a road, and the project team understood like if they had to construct a culvert. Now there is a difference between a bridge and culvert, though the function of the both is same, to facilitate the flow of the water. However, this is not meant by that. And then delays. When the things are not clear, the things get delayed, and hence extra costs are actually incurred by doing that rework. Unavailability of or provision of wrong inputs, and omissions and mistakes in the creation of deliverables. Poor decision making and problem solving, and dissatisfaction and frustration among project stakeholders. So these are some reasons or some facts which are actually triggered by some of the shortcomings in communication. And what is the importance of project communication? Should we carry out project communication in initiation only, or at planning stage only, or we have to carry this thing in monitoring and evaluation stage, or execution stage, or closure stage? Where should we actually use our communication? Well, if your answer is throughout the life cycle, from scratch to end, then your answer is very much right. And yes, and this slide has already been shown in previous lecture about stakeholder, and the importance of this slide is if the number of stakeholders are more, and the importance of developing and management of the stakeholder engagement strategy is more, then you are actually spending more time, effort and cost to manage the stakeholders because of their informational needs, and communication is very effective thing to manage and engaging the stakeholders. So there is a direct relationship between the number of stakeholders and communication lines, and the number of possible communication lines which can exist between stakeholders on a project can be calculated using the following simple formula, and that is communication line or line of communication is equal to n times n minus 1 and divided by 2. So n is the number of stakeholders, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever the number of stakeholders we do have. So let's say if we are having these 3 stakeholders, and the names are, let's say, Shabar, Kafayat and Asim, and they have to interact with each other. So maximum possible number of lines for project stakeholder communication according to the formula we have seen in previous slide is n time n minus 1 by 2. And what do we mean by n? It is the number of stakeholders. So in that case n is 3, so 3 times 3 minus 1 divided by 2, so that is 3 times 2, 6, and 6 by 2, so the communication lines are 3. And when it comes to 4 stakeholders, see, and the stakeholder names are Imran, Usman, Shabar and Naveed, and then maximum possible lines according to that formula n times n minus 1 by 2 is 6. So the stakeholders are 6, 4, and the number of communication lines are 6. So this is pretty much, is the idea how to actually calculate the communication lines. Now let's have an example, and let's have, we are having this one big project and the number of stakeholders are 1,000, and that is n. So communication lines will be, by that, for that case, n times n minus 1 divided by 2, and by putting up this value 1,000 times 1,000 minus 1 and divided by 2, and that is 1,000 and then 999 and divided by 2, and that is, if we multiply both, we do have 99, and that is huge. I mean, okay, so if we divide that, so 4 and then 9 and then 9 and then 5, so this much is the number of stakeholder communication lines. So you are talking about some figure over there, 499,500 communication lines. So that is a very complex project, if you have to manage all these lines, these are possible lines which may exist over there. And then let's have a very practical example of a road project of medium size, and then a stakeholder over there are about, let's say, 200. And then for this very practical project, if you actually calculate, the maximum possible lines are those divided by 2, and this is 100, and then we are having, so these numbers are very huge, 19,000 communication lines. So if we are having, let's say, 10 stakeholders, so for that line of communication, 10 times 10 minus 1 and 2 and 5 times 9, 45. So for only 10 stakeholders, or team members or whatever you call them, you are about to have 45 stakeholders. So by every addition of one stakeholder, you are having quite a number. Okay, so if we put another definition over there, and line of communication is 11, and stakeholders are 11, so 11 minus 1 and 2, and that is 55. So by adding only one stakeholder, our communication lines has been increased to 10. I mean by 10, increased to 55 from 45. So see, this formula can be used for calculating the number of lines. So the more the stakeholders you have, the more communication lines you may have, and the more complex the project will become. So okay, so this is an example over there. So there are, there are this stakeholder. So there are different stakeholders, and there are 10 stakeholders. And see the net over there, all this stuff, they are having so many different communication lines, and everybody's been interacted and having interaction with each other. So 10 project stakeholders are having 45 possible communication lines, and this net over there is so complex. And just think of the example we were having of this very practical medium level road project where 200 stakeholders are involved, and then you actually, how to actually manage that? You think everybody is needed to communicate with everybody. So here comes the hierarchical structures. Okay, so when this comes to some big organization, project carrying organization, so they do have informational desks. So the public at large do have only one interface, and that is the PR's girl or guy, and this is headed by, so everybody outside the organization is having interaction with that one person. So we are actually reducing, and we do not want to have so many communication lines on our project, and we want to restrict them so that we can actually manage. Like if you are having these 19,000 communication lines, how can you actually manage them? I mean, so you are saying that, okay, the engineers will be communicating to the supervisory staff and only to the project manager, and the supervisory staff will not be communicating with the project manager directly until and unless the engineer has told them to do so. So these communication lines are maximum. So if the team decides, or the engineer or whatever, the supervisor, he decides that, okay, now you can have direct meeting with the project manager, he is actually allowing this communication line to be established between project manager and the staff. But if that is not allowed, so at times we can give activation or deactivation to communication line between two stakeholders. In this fashion, we actually manage the communication between different stakeholders. And this is the thing I was telling you about. यहाँ आप देख सकते हैं कि अगर आपके 3 stakeholders हों और फिर 4 हों और फिर 5 हों, तो एक बड़ा स्मूथ सा आप जो है ना वो इसमें जो है वो चीज़ देख सकते हैं कि एक आपका जो बड़ा स्मूथ सा जा रहा है एक ट्रेंड, लेकिन उसके बाद आप स्टेक होल्डर बढ़ाएंगे तो ये एकदम से वर्टिकल हो जाता है, राइट. सो इसके बाद अगर आप करेंगे तो ये स्टेक होल्डर्स आपके 10 थे, और अगर आप 25 पे गए हैं तो देखें स्टेक होल्डर 300 स्टेक होल्डर हो गए. सो दिस फिगर इज एंड देन दिस सिंपली से दिस फिगर 10 पे 45 थे और 20 पे आपके 190 हैं, जो कि काफ़ी ज़्यादा, मतलब 4 times to that. Challenges in project communications, and one of the challenge in project communication is over communication. And then is under communication and miscommunication, misdirected communication, and untimely communication. So over communication, we mean too much communication, resulting in a flood of unmanageable information. So, okay, I share one example with you. So while I was actually working on this project of road construction, and that site was located in an area where rainfalls are witnessed with good frequency, and big frequency was there. Then when it rains, you know, you cannot actually work over there. So whole of the site was actually at halt when it was raining. So I used to write a letter to my employer and the client. So it is to inform you that it is raining today, so we are not actually working this day. And according to the contract, I was trying to establish a claim of extension of time in later stages. So the contract was, the time was of the essence in that contract by that time. And even we had to pay a very good, very large penalty if we are not completing the project on time. So while I have written a few letters of such nature, the project manager of the client has written me back, okay, so do not write me these letters because I have nothing to do with the raining. So you better write the villager who are praying for the rain. So I'm not actually obliged at all. And then this guy, the project manager, very senior guy, he came to our office and he's told me that according to the contract, the rains are not covered under his risk. Okay, and what I'm actually doing over there is unnecessary over communication, and at times my important letters are actually being you know, overlooked by that project manager of the employer. So I should not write such thing which do not have or which does not have any value as far as contract is concerned. So that was an example of over communication on my part. Okay, so because I used to write 3 or 4 or 5 letters of raining in a week, and then there were important letters, and because the client is so much busy, and when it comes to the contractor is writing so many letters, you know, it become a bit, you know, difficult for the client to manage all the communication. So this is very simple example. Many people are very much fond of writing things, and they used to write this letter, reminder number 1, reminder number 2, and then reminder number 550. I mean, what's the big point of writing such a reminder? I mean, okay. Under communication. So information may be inadequate or for effective decision making. So if I'm asking you to give me the information about the status of your project, and you are saying, okay, our project is 50% completed. So I'm not sure what are you talking about, whether this is physical 50% progress or financial progress of the project. So what do you mean by that? Time or cost or quality or what? Deliverables? So you have to actually be very, very careful if what is the information and what do you mean by providing the document. And then miscommunication, incorrect information, and that is very, very dangerous, may be conveyed with negative consequences for the project. And then come this misdirected communication. So information is not conveyed to the recipients which need it. So unnecessary, like some people are so much fond of writing letters, और जब वो एक letter लिख लेते हैं तो वो CC कर देते हैं Chief Justice of Pakistan, the President of Pakistan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the Federal Secretary or Federal Minister for Finances, Federal Minister for Interior, and Federal Minister for XYZ. You know, what is the big point? And they were having, actually they were writing a letter to concerned district level officer of the government. So what is the big point by writing and copying all these letters to these things, you know? They are not the recipients of, or they are not intended recipients of such letter. So they should not be, you know. So, or this may be the case, like if you want to have some problem, if you want to resolve your problem of electricity, and you are writing to Sui Gas Department. Now you are not doing so good. I mean, okay, untimely communication. Information is not conveyed at the point in time when it is needed. So there is the Prime Minister or your project manager or your senior manager of or senior director of your company. He wants some information, and you says that you say that okay, we will write this information, or we will prepare a comprehensive presentation, and we will send it on next week. And this guy wants it straight away so that he can actually use this information for the top management. But you are not actually giving that information on time, and then you actually send the information on Tuesday. But the presentation has already been carried out, so your information is untimely. Project communication must be concise and precise in order to increase the likelihood that it can be conveyed effectively. So in engineering, it is usually easy to communicate with stakeholders because of the use of common symbolization, formulas, and terminology, and on the other hand, communication in social sciences can pose challenge at times because stakeholders may have different understanding of the terminology used. So when it comes to engineering, we have this type of drawings. Okay, so this drawing shows that F1 is floor 1, let's say, and the 3 over this is actually showing some cross-sectional, and the 7.65 is the dimension, whether it is in meter or in feet, whatever the dimension we have specified. And this is a staircase over there, and this is a car porch, and this line shows a cross-section, and this is a dining table, and this is guest room, and this is kitchen. So see, over there we can have actually different types of symbols, and which are quite understandable among the engineers and stuff like that. So they are very, very clear what do they mean by the plan, the elevation, the square foot, and stuff like that. Whereas when it comes to social sector projects, project communication is very much a risky business, because let's say we have this example. The criteria for success was fixed for the project, social sector project, and that was to educate the people of a locality, and the locality is some remote area. And the purpose of this project was to educate 100 people or 1,000 people, and then after the project completion, they have concluded that they were able to communicate with the people, and they were able to actually impart education not in 1,000 but 900 people. So 90% is the success rate of that. This is a very good example of one project and one organization. Say there is second NGO that is carrying out the same type project, and the audience or the target group they have is actually in 10 villages, and one of the villages is the team 1 of the another NGO is working on for 1,000 people, and this is big NGO, and the funding is huge, and they are actually taking care of 100 villages, and they do not know if the second NGO is working in the same area, and they have to provide the same education thing to the people. Now after that, they have concluded that their figure is like 80% of the success. Now you cannot actually evaluate for those 1,000 common audience how much have this NGO imparted and how much has this team number 1 has imparted the education in them. So you are really unable to identify. So this thing, education, is very broad term. For me, education may be a different, having different meaning, and for you, for some people, matriculation is quite an education, and for some, even graduation or post-graduation is not an education. They actually give some other parameters to education. So this is very much there. When it comes to social sector project, the communication is different because they have different meanings of the terminologies they use. So examples of unprecise communication are, so if you say that be cooperative with the project line. Now what do you mean by cooperative? I mean finish the task quickly. What do you mean by quickly? In 2 days or 3 days or 4 days? I mean, for me quickly means in 5 minutes, and for you it may be like after 5 days. Okay, arrange a team meeting. Now this is again unprecise. What do you mean by arrange a team meeting? What is the time? Okay, for how much time, and who should be attending that? Do a good job in capturing the client's requirements. What do you mean by good job? Okay, so there should be a proper listed process. You have to follow this process to get capture the client's requirements. Ensure that team performs well. What do you mean by well? Okay, so you must have some indices and parameter set so that the team's performance actually can be evaluated on that parameter. And then discuss major problems and issues. Now what do you mean by major? For me, the major is, maybe the minor problem or issue for you. Okay, ask for more funds when the time is appropriate. What do you mean by time is appropriate? When the time is appropriate, when the time is not appropriate. Okay, inform the project manager of serious risk. What do you mean by serious risk? Okay, so you have to actually quantify. So these are few unprecise communication types and examples. Okay, when it comes to culture and project communication, in different cultures, things are taken, body language with different things, and culture is becoming a very important consideration as far as communication is concerned. So symbols or acts which are used in civilization or culture with such an ease may not be adopted by this other civilization. So if you point a finger to somebody, okay, you have to do maybe a different symbol or having different meaning if you are using this thing in different culture. So it is such a cultural based. So so people may perceive different thing or meanings of same very action. And a different culture includes like different languages and then interpretation of the language and body language, as I was actually explaining one example. Okay, now we come forward to the project communication management processes, and there are 3 of the processes we do have in PMBOK 5. In PMBOK 4, the number of processes were 5, but there was not knowledge area of stakeholder management. So the stakeholder management processes were part of communication management. But in this, they have actually separated stakeholder management from communication management, though that are integral to each other, and they substantiate each other as far as the importance is concerned. But there are 3 processes for communication management, and the one is plan communication management, the process of developing an appropriate approach and plan for project communication based on stakeholders' information needs and requirements and available organization assets. And manage communication, the process of creating, collecting, distributing, storing, retrieving, and ultimate disposition of project information in accordance with the communication management plan. And control communications, the process of monitoring and controlling communications throughout the entire project life cycle to ensure the information needs of the project stakeholders are met. So there are few inputs, tools and technique, and outputs given in this slide. For example, for plan communication management, you are having project management plan, stakeholder register from stakeholder knowledge area, and enterprise environmental factors and organizational processes assets. And then you apply communication requirements analysis, communication technology, analogous, telephone, video, and stuff, communication models, and communication itself. Then output, communications management plan and project documents updates. So manage communication, you are having these communication technology, models, methods, systems, and reporting as tools and technique. And then information management systems and expert judgment and meetings. Those are tools and technique for controlling communication. So we were having this one input of stakeholder register, and that is from stakeholder management knowledge area. And that is main output of identify stakeholders. It contains the detail of identification information, name, organizational position, location, role in project, contact information, assessment information, major requirements, main expectations, potential influence in the project phase and life cycle with the most interest, and stakeholder classification, internal, external, supporter, neutral register. So these are information which are actually needed for communication management. And then you collect communication requirements. The analysis of requirements determines the information needs of the project stakeholders. These requirements are defined by combining the type and format of information needed with an analysis of the value of that information. Then the project manager should consider the number of potential communication channels or paths as indicated for the complexity of the project communication, and we have talked on that. So this line of communication formula, n times n minus 1 by 2. And a key component of planning the project's actual communications, therefore, is to determine the and limit who will communicate with whom and who will receive what information. We have talked on that as well. So then information typically used to determine project communication requirements include organization charts, disciplines, logistics of how many persons will be involved with the project and at which location, external information, internal information, stakeholder information. Then communication methods. There are several communication methods available, and few of them are interactive communication between two or more people performing a multi-directional exchange. It is most efficient way to reach some to ensure common understanding. So these are a kind of meetings and phone calls when they are on conferencing, phone conferencing, and then video conferencing are there. And then push communication and send to specific recipients who need to know the information. And these are very specific, and the examples of push communication are letters, memos, reports, emails, faxes, voicemails, press releases. And pull communication used for very large volume of information for a very large audience. That requires the recipient to access the communication content at their own discretion. These methods include intranet sites, e-learning, knowledge resources. And then we were talking about communication management plan, and the communication management plan usually provide what? These are the things which a communication management plan. Stakeholder communication requirements, information to be communicated including language, format, content and level of detail, reasons for the distribution of that information, time frame and frequency, when and how much information for distribution of required information. Person responsible for communicating the information. Okay, so who is actually working and who is actually authorizing and who is actually communicating. So that has already been decided, and that is part of communication management plan. Then a person responsible for authorizing releases of confidential information, person or group who will receive the information, and methods or technologies used to convey the information such as memos, email, or press releases. So communication technology, we mean like phone, analogous, digital, projector, movie, some internet or email or some other medium, you know, letters or stuff like that. And then communication plan also include resources allocated for communication activities, including time and budget, and escalation process, identifying time frames and the management chain for escalation of issues that cannot be resolved at a lower staff level. And then method for updating and refining the communications management plan as the project progresses and develops. And glossary of common terminology, flow charts of the information flow, and communication constraints. So these are part of communication management plan. And mediums of communication may be verbal, non-verbal, written, analogous technology, digital technology, and then we may have this formal verbal, and informal verbal, and formal written, and informal written. So when it comes to professional thing, so for verbal, formal verbal, you may have a presentation. Okay, so you are actually having this formal verbal, and informal verbal, like if you are sitting in a meeting and you are communicating and everybody is communicating across the table, so they are actually following this verbal informal. And written formal is a letter. Okay, so a very good drafted letter is but a note or chit note, you know, so I'm leaving the office, or SMS is kind of informal written. So there are examples of analog technology and digital technology, and digital technology include but not limited to the computer, the projector, the email and stuff like that, and analog, you know, the telephones and stuff like that. So these are a few mediums of which are being used over for that. Now, so this is the today's lecture, and we had talked about the importance of communication in this lecture, and that lecture is supplemented the lectures we had on stakeholder management. That is very much part of it, and we had discussed the relationship between the communication, information, and stakeholders. So now let's have a summary what we had discussed in this very lecture. So we had defined the communication and different definitions, and a few common things between them is the information transformation from one person to another person, the information. And then communication management, every action to actually manage the communication and informational needs of the stakeholders is part of communication management. And then the relevance of communication to project management, so that was discussed in great detail. And then purpose of communication, why do we actually communicate with anybody? We want to actually request them, or we want to notify them, and we want their help. So that's why. Basic communication model, and that is very much there. One guy intends to communicate, and other one is a recipient, and he or she is actually is receiving the information through some media. So I have explained that model in detail. Then shortcoming in communications can cause a lot of problems. We had discussed in detail. and communication lines, and we had done some numericals over there. With the increase in stakeholders, the communication lines do get increased, but at a rate more than the double even. I mean, at times you are increasing one stakeholder, and we had done this example, the number of communication lines are increased by 10. So then challenges in communication, how do we actually mitigate those problems and challenges? And then communication management framework, the processes, there are 3 of them, and these 3 of them, processes, they are complemented with stakeholder management processes for better management of project. And in the last we had discussed about communication methods, and then we had discussed in detail what should the project communication management plan include. So that was discussed. The overall essence of this lecture was the more complex our project is, the more complex communication will be. And you know, if you are doing that engineering project, the communication are bit easy, but you know the number of the stakeholders are huge over there. And when it comes to social sector projects, so the symbols and terms, they are so subjective, the communication is a bit difficult over there. So if the number of stakeholders are more, so the communication management is complex, and hence project is complex. And at times the number of stakeholders are less, and the project is complex, and because of the complexity inherent in the project, the communication becomes complex. So by making complex communication, we may have complex project, and for a complex project we may have complex communicational needs of the stakeholders. So we conclude today's lecture with this very good quotation, and that speak when you are angry and you will make the best speech you will ever regret. So do not speak when you are angry. And I conclude this lecture on communication management. I say thank you, good luck, and Allah Hafiz.